The first time I saw the room, it was on a blueprint my husband swore he had never seen. It was labeled simply, Room 4. No windows, no exterior door, no measurements written inside, just a square sealed into the middle of our house. I laughed when I saw it because our house only had 3 bedrooms, and I had lived there for 9 years. I knew every wall, every closet, every crooked floorboard. Then the contractor stared at the plan for a long time and said, "This room should still be there." I stopped laughing. He tapped the paper again. "There's enough space inside your house for it." I looked at my husband. His face had gone pale, and that was the exact moment I realized there was something inside my home that someone had spent years making sure I never found. My name is Rachel Morgan. I was 41 when the wall in my dining room destroyed the version of my marriage I had believed in for almost 15 years. My husband, David, and I bought our house when I was 32. It was an old colonial at the edge of a quiet Pennsylvania town, built in 1954 and renovated badly enough over the decades that almost nothing matched. One hallway leaned slightly. The basement stairs were too narrow. The guest room had an electrical outlet 6 inches from the ceiling, for reasons no one could explain. I loved it immediately. David did too, or at least I thought he did. He had always been calmer than me, almost painfully practical. If I saw potential, he saw repair costs. If I fell in love with old windows, he saw drafts. His greatest strength was that he rarely panicked. His greatest weakness was almost the same thing. David could bury anything uncomfortable under logic, until it disappeared. We had one daughter, Lily, who was 13 then. She had inherited my curiosity, and David's ability to pretend she didn't care. She spent most evenings with headphones on, acting as if family life was something happening to other people. We were not an unhappy family. That matters. There was no obvious betrayal waiting in the kitchen, no screaming marriage, no secret second phone I had discovered under a mattress. David kissed me goodbye every morning. He made coffee badly and consistently. We argued about money, his mother, and whether Lily spent too much time online. Ordinary problems. The kind you mistake for proof that nothing worse is hiding underneath. The blueprint appeared because we decided to renovate the kitchen. I had wanted to knock down the wall between the dining room and pantry for years. David always resisted. The wall is probably load-bearing. You say every wall is load-bearing. Somebody has to respect gravity in this marriage. It became one of our jokes. Then a pipe burst behind the pantry sink. The plumber opened the wall and found old framing that made no sense. He suggested we get the original building plans from the county before starting the larger renovation. 2 days later, I unfolded a yellowed blueprint across our dining table. And there it was. Room 4, directly behind the pantry. I called David over. "Look at this." He glanced down. His entire expression changed for less than a second, but I saw it. That was the first crack. David recovered quickly. Probably an old drafting error. An entire room? Houses change. The exterior walls didn't. He shrugged. That shrug irritated me more than fear would have. The contractor, Miguel Alvarez, arrived the next morning. He was 53, broad-shouldered, patient, and had the permanent squint of someone who had spent years measuring other people's mistakes. Miguel studied the blueprint, then walked through the house with a laser measure. Dining room, pantry, hallway, guest room. He repeated the measurements twice. Then he stood in the middle of the dining room and looked toward the pantry wall. "You're missing about 96 square feet." I laughed because that number sounded ridiculous. You can lose 96 square feet. Not unless someone put it somewhere. David folded his arms. The renovation changed the footprint. Miguel shook his head. Outside dimensions matched the blueprint almost exactly. That was when Lily looked up from her phone. So, there's a secret room? David snapped faster than I had ever heard him. No. Lily went quiet. Miguel glanced between us. Then he said, "There's another thing. On the blueprint, room 4 had once connected to a narrow corridor that should have opened behind our pantry cabinets. But when Miguel removed the cabinet backing, we found old brick. Not plaster, not drywall. Brick. A professionally sealed doorway. David stared at it too long. I turned toward him. You knew. No. You knew there was something behind this wall. I knew the house had been renovated. That's not what I said. He walked away. For the first time in 15 years, I watched my husband leave a room because he was afraid of the question inside it. And suddenly I wanted to know what he thought I was about to find. That night, David barely spoke. I waited until Lily went upstairs. Then I placed the blueprint between us. Tell me the truth. I am. You saw that room before. No. You reacted. Rachel, you're building a conspiracy out of a floor plan. That sentence stayed with me because it was exactly the kind of thing David said when he wanted to make emotion sound irrational. I had seen him do it with his mother, with work, with our money. If something frightened him, he made it sound silly. So I asked a different question. Did you know the pantry wall had been bricked? He hesitated. Only half a second. Yes. My stomach dropped. He explained that when we bought the house, the previous owner had mentioned an old sealed doorway. David had never told me because it didn't matter. Why didn't it matter? Because there was nothing behind it. How did you know? Another pause. Then he made his second mistake. I checked. The room went completely still. You checked? Years ago. How? He looked toward the floor. There was only one way. The basement. We had an unfinished storage section beneath the pantry, but David had always told me one corner was inaccessible because of foundation work. I stood up. He caught my wrist gently. Rachel, don't. That scared me more than anything he had said. I pulled away. Why? His voice lowered. Because this is not going to give you what you think it will. That was the moment suspicion became certainty. Not certainty about what he had done, only certainty that he had done something. And I was going downstairs. The storage area smelled of dust, concrete, and old insulation. David followed me with a flashlight. Behind stacks of paint cans was a plywood panel screwed into the wall. I had seen it hundreds of times. I had never questioned it. David had always called it a foundation access. I handed him the screwdriver. Open it. He didn't move. Open it. He finally did. Behind the panel was a narrow gap just large enough to crawl through. I felt sick. How long have you known? Since before we bought the house. I turned slowly. Before, and there it was, the third lie. David had known about the hidden room before we ever signed the papers. He sat on a paint bucket and rubbed both hands over his face. My father told me. That made even less sense. David's father, Harold Morgan, had died 4 years before we bought the house. He knew this house? David nodded. He grew up here. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to accept the shape of the lie. You told me you found this listing online. I did. No. You found your childhood family house and pretended it was random. It wasn't my childhood home. Your father grew up here. That's different. No, David. That's a sentence you say when you want something terrible to sound technical. He flinched. That was the first time I had ever seen him look ashamed. Then a sound came from inside the gap. A small metallic scrape. We both froze. Another scrape. I reached for the flashlight. David grabbed my shoulder. There could be animals. I crawled in anyway. The passage opened into darkness, and at the end there was a wall. Not brick. Wood. Old vertical boards. One of them had been moved recently. I knew because the dust on the floor had been disturbed. Someone had been inside that hidden space. Recently. And there were only 3 people with keys to our house. The 3rd key belonged to David's mother, Evelyn. Evelyn Morgan was 76 and had the kind of politeness that could feel like an accusation. She and I had never openly disliked each other. We had simply spent 15 years speaking as if every sentence had invisible subtitles. Her weakness was pride. She could survive almost anything except being seen as foolish. When I called and asked whether she had been inside our house recently, she said no too quickly. I drove to her apartment without telling David. Evelyn opened the door in a silk robe at 2 p.m. You look upset. You had a key to our house. I still do. Have you been using it? She studied me. Then she said, David finally told you. That sentence changed everything. Told me what? She closed her eyes. When she opened them, her face had hardened. Come inside. I expected an affair, a crime, a dead body, some shameful family story attached to the hidden room. Instead, Evelyn brought me an old photo album. The first photograph showed the house in 1961. The second showed David's father as a boy standing on the front steps. The third showed another child beside him, a girl, maybe 10. Same dark eyes, same narrow smile. I pointed. Who is she? Evelyn stared at the picture for a long time. Anna. David's aunt. My sister-in-law. Where is she now? Evelyn's jaw tightened. She died in this house. My skin went cold. When? 1963. How? Evelyn looked directly at me. In room 4. For one horrifying second, every irrational possibility became believable. Then Evelyn added, and Harold spent the rest of his life pretending she had never existed. Anna Morgan was 11 when she died. Harold was 14. Their parents, Charles and Miriam, had designed room 4 for Anna after she became seriously ill with rheumatic fever complications that left her weak for months. It was not a prison. It was not a punishment room. It was a small recovery bedroom placed near the warmest part of the house. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Why hide it? Evelyn turned a page. After Anna's death, Miriam refused to enter the room. Charles sealed it. Years later, when the house was sold, the corridor was bricked over. Harold never talked about his sister again. David knew this? Yes. Before we bought the house? Yes. Why would he bring me here? Evelyn's expression changed. He didn't. What? Harold did. My father-in-law had left the address in a private letter to David, along with a request. Buy it back if it ever comes on the market. David had obeyed, without telling me. That explained the house. It did not explain the recent footprints. I showed Evelyn the photograph I had taken under the basement. Her face changed immediately. Those boards shouldn't be open. You've been inside. No. Then who has? She said nothing. I pushed harder. Evelyn. Finally, she whispered, ask David about Anna's diary. And once again, the mystery moved. David was waiting when I got home. He looked at my face and knew I had spoken to his mother. Where's the diary? He didn't pretend not to understand. That hurt more than another lie would have. He went to his office and returned with a small leather book. Anna's name was embossed inside. You had this the whole time. Yes. Why? My father gave it to me before he died. I opened it. Most entries were ordinary. School, neighbors, a boy she liked, her mother hovering too much. Then the tone changed. Anna wrote repeatedly about someone named Michael. Michael came through the kitchen. Michael brought candy. Michael told her not to tell Harold. Michael said he would take her away when she got better. My stomach turned. Who was Michael? David swallowed. My grandfather's brother. Charles Morgan's younger brother. A man I had never heard mentioned. I kept reading. The later entries became frightened. Michael was angry. Michael wanted money. Michael argued with Charles. Michael came into Anna's room at night. I looked at David. What did he do to her? I don't know. That sounded true, and that was somehow worse. Then I reached the last entry. Anna had written one sentence. I heard Daddy tell Michael he has to leave tomorrow. Michael says if he goes, he's taking me with him. The diary ended there. Anna died the next night. Official cause, heart failure. But now the sealed room no longer felt like grief. It felt like evidence. And David had known enough to hide it from me. I became convinced Michael killed Anna. So did Lily, who had overheard more than we realized. Maybe he scared her, she said. Or hurt her. David snapped, "Stop!" Lily stared at him. You keep saying stop every time we get close. That landed. David's weakness was control. Lily's was cruelty disguised as honesty. Mine, I was beginning to realize, was certainty. Once I found a version of events that made emotional sense, I wanted it to be true. Miguel returned the next morning with an endoscope camera. We pushed it through the loosened board. The hidden room still existed. Dusty, small, wallpaper peeling from the walls, an iron bed frame, a wooden dresser, and on the far wall, someone had written something. Miguel adjusted the camera. 3 words appeared. He didn't know. I felt the hair rise on my arms. David whispered, "That wasn't there before." Someone had entered room 4 recently and written that message. We called Evelyn. No answer. We drove to her apartment. Empty. Her car was gone. On her kitchen table was an envelope addressed to David. Inside was a single key and a note. You deserve the whole truth now. The key was for the hidden room, and Evelyn had left us one more address, a nursing home 40 minutes away. Resident, Michael Morgan, alive, 92 years old. I expected a monster. That was my mistake. Michael Morgan was small, thin, and nearly blind. His hands shook. His voice was weak. He looked less like the villain I had imagined, and more like someone who had spent decades becoming old. David stood across from him and said, "Tell me what happened to Anna." Michael began crying before he answered. Not dramatic tears, silent ones. "I loved her." David's face hardened. "Don't say that." "Not like that." Michael wiped his eyes. "She was a child. She was my niece." He explained that he had been fighting with Charles, because Charles had accused him of stealing money from the family business. Michael denied it. He planned to leave town. Anna overheard part of the argument and misunderstood. I told her I'd take her to see the ocean when she was healthy. That was all. Then why did she die that night? Michael's hands tightened around the blanket. Because Charles locked her door. Silence. David stared at him. What? Michael looked terrified even after 63 years. Anna had started wandering at night. Miriam was exhausted. Charles put a latch on the outside so she couldn't fall down the stairs. I felt sick. During the night she had trouble breathing. Michael nodded. She called for help. His voice broke. Harold heard her. David went completely still. Dad. Michael looked at him. Harold heard her. That was the meaning of the message. He didn't know. But now I needed to know who he was, and why Harold had spent his life burying the room. Evelyn was sitting in the nursing home garden. She had been waiting for us. David walked straight to her. You knew. Yes. Dad heard Anna. Evelyn nodded. Then she told us the part no one had written down. Harold heard Anna calling through the wall around midnight. He had been angry with her. That afternoon, Anna had told their parents that Harold had skipped school to meet friends. He was 14, humiliated, furious. So when she called his name that night, he ignored her. At first. Then she called again. He put a pillow over his head. By the time Miriam checked the room an hour later, Anna was unconscious. She died before morning. Harold had not caused her illness. He had not locked the door. He had not known she was dying. But he had heard her, and he had chosen not to answer. Evelyn covered her mouth. He was 14 years old, Rachel. David looked destroyed. He thought he killed her. Yes. For 60 years, Harold carried that belief. He convinced his father to seal the room. He destroyed most photographs. He stopped saying Anna's name. And before his death, he gave David the diary and asked him to buy the house back. Not because he wanted the room hidden forever. Because he wanted David to decide whether the truth should survive him. David had chosen silence. Like his father. Like Evelyn. Like everyone else. I looked at my husband. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. Because I was ashamed of a dead boy I never met. That was the saddest answer he could have given. But the story still wasn't finished, because someone had entered the room recently and written that message. It was Lily, our 13-year-old daughter. She admitted it that night. Months earlier, she had found the loose basement panel while looking for a place to hide birthday presents. She crawled through, moved the board, entered room 4. Inside the dresser, she found one thing we had not seen on the camera. A letter. From Harold. Written in 2008. He had entered the room shortly before selling the property decades earlier, and left the letter hidden inside. Lily had read it. She had also written, "He didn't know," on the wall. Why? She was crying now. Because Grandpa David's dad didn't know Anna was dying. He was just mad at her. You knew all this and said nothing. I thought Dad knew. David looked at her. I didn't. That was the final irony. 3 generations of Morgans had protected each other with silence, and my daughter had repeated the pattern without even realizing it. Lily brought us the letter. Harold had written, "If anyone ever opens this room again, please understand one thing. I was not a good brother that night, but I was not a murderer either. I was 14. I was angry. I heard Anna call me, and I decided she could wait. She couldn't. I have spent my life turning one terrible childish choice into a life sentence. If David ever reads this, I hope he does not make the same mistake I did. Do not inherit my silence. Do not confuse shame with loyalty. Tell the truth while the people you love are still alive to hear it." David sat down on the floor. For the first time since I had known him, he cried without trying to hide it, and that was when I finally understood what the hidden room had really been built to contain. Not Anna, not evidence, not a crime. Shame. We opened room 4 officially 2 weeks later. The brick doorway came down. Dust filled the pantry. For the first time in 63 years, daylight from our kitchen reached Anna's room. Behind the dresser, Miguel discovered another thin wall. When he removed it, we found a narrow service cavity. Inside was a metal box. My heart sank. I thought there was another secret. There was, but not the kind I expected. The box contained property documents. Charles Morgan had placed the house into a trust after Anna's death. The beneficiary was not Harold. It was Anna, because he had created the trust months before she died. When she died, the trust should have transferred to her surviving sibling, Harold. But Charles never completed the paperwork. Years later, the title was corrected incorrectly during a sale. The legal issue had followed the property silently for decades. David stared at the documents. "Does this mean we don't own the house?" The attorney we hired smiled sadly. "No." Then she pointed to a name. The final contingent beneficiary on the original trust was Harold's eldest living descendant. Not son. Descendant. That person was Lily. Our 13-year-old daughter legally had a claim to the property stronger than either of us. David laughed once in disbelief. Then he looked at Lily. "So technically, you own the secret room?" She wiped her eyes. "Can I charge rent?" It was the first time any of us had laughed in weeks, but that was not the twist that stayed with me. The real twist came later. We had assumed Harold bought the house back through David because he could not let go of Anna. We were wrong. His letter explained why. He knew the trust defect still existed. He knew one day the title might pass to David's child. He had wanted the house back in the family not to preserve his guilt, but to give the next generation the one thing Anna never got: a choice. We restored room 4, not as a bedroom, not as a shrine. We turned it into a small reading room. We kept one section of the old wallpaper. We framed Anna's photograph. And on the wall where Lily had written "he didn't know," we left the words exactly as they were, because they meant something different now. Harold didn't know she would die. David didn't know Lily had found the room. I didn't know my husband had inherited a secret before he inherited the house. And Lily didn't know that by opening one hidden door, she was ending a silence that had lasted 3 generations. A year later, our renovation was finished. One evening I stood in the kitchen while David made coffee. Still badly. Lily was in room 4 doing homework. The doorway stood open. No brick, no plywood, no hidden passage. Just an ordinary room. That was the strangest part. After all those years, the room that had terrified everyone became almost boring, and I think that was exactly how it should have ended, because secrets only seem enormous while they are sealed away. Once you open the door, they become something smaller, something human, something you can finally live beside. I used to think the worst thing a family could inherit was guilt. I was wrong. The worst thing is silence. Guilt can change when you understand where it came from. Shame can soften when someone finally names it. Even terrible choices can be seen differently with time. But silence does something else. It grows. One person hides a mistake. The next person hides the shame. The next person protects the secret. Eventually, nobody even remembers who the silence was supposed to protect. Harold thought one terrible decision at 14 defined his entire life. David thought protecting his father's shame was an act of loyalty. Lily thought keeping what she found would spare her father pain. And I almost turned every person in the story into a villain, because I was desperate for one simple explanation. There wasn't one. There was only a family full of frightened people making imperfect choices. The hidden room was never the most important part of the house. The important part was the door. Someone had to open it. If you were Rachel, would you have exposed everything the moment you found the sealed room? Or would you have respected David's family secret? And what do you think about Harold? Was he just a frightened 14-year-old boy who made one terrible mistake? Or did his decision to ignore Anna deserve the guilt he carried for the rest of his life? Write your opinion in the comments.